Hello guys, welcome back to Beer HR. Grab your drink, pull up a chair. This is episode number 10, The Future of Work, What HR Must Prepare For. We are going to discuss 5 major points. Point number 1, hybrid and remote evolution. Point number 2, gig workforce trends. Point number 3, skills over degrees. Point number 4, employee well-being as a strategy. Point number 5, human-centered workplaces. Let's dive into point number 1, hybrid and remote evolution. Let me start with a simple image. It is March 2020. Offices around the world go dark, laptops close on desks, plants are left unwatered, conference rooms sit silent, and overnight, work leaves the building. But here's a twist. Remote work wasn't born in 2020. It had been quietly evolving for years. The crisis just accelerated what was already coming. So today, let's talk about the evolution of hybrid and remote work, not as a policy shift, but as a leadership and culture transformation. When the pandemic hit, Microsoft had the infra to move quickly. Teams shifted to Microsoft Teams, cloud demand surged, productivity tools became essential overnight. But the bigger shift wasn't technical, it was cultural. CEO Satya Nadella didn't frame remote work as a temporary inconvenience. He acknowledged the emotional toll of isolation, burnout, and blurred boundaries. Microsoft introduced flexible work guidelines, allowing employees to work remotely up to 50% of the time without manager approval. They invested in digital collaboration norms and emphasized well being. The message wasn't work from home until this is over. It was work is what we do, not where we go. That mindset shift marked the beginning of hybrid evolution. Now let's go somewhere different. Before the pandemic, GitLab was already fully remote, with employees across a dozens of countries. No headquarters, no centralized office, no default physical space. Instead, they built an intentional remote culture. Everything documented, meetings recorded, decisions written, not whispered, transparency by default. GitLab even made its employees handbook public. Thousands of pages are detailing how they work. Why? Because in remote environments, clarity replaces proximity. You can't rely on hallway conversations. You can't depend on body language. You need systems. GitLab showed the world that a remote first wasn't chaotic. It could be structured, disciplined, and high performing. Now, here is a reality check. Not every company can go remote. At Starbucks, baristas can't make lattes over Zoom, but corporate teams could work remotely, and that created tension. In 2023, Starbucks asked corporate employees to return to the office 3 days a week. Some resisted, some leaders emphasized in person collaboration. This highlights something critical about hybrid evolution. Hybrid isn't just a policy, it is a negotiation between flexibility, collaboration, and operational reality. Organizations are still experimenting, there is no universal formula. In 2022, Airbnb made a bold announcement. Employees could live and work from anywhere without pay cuts based on location within their country. CEO Brand publicly stated that the office would become a place for gathering, not default working. They redesigned work around three principles. Number one, live anywhere. Number two, meet intentionally. Number three, work asynchronously. And interestingly, application search. Airbnb leaned into flexibility as a talent strategy. Hybrid wasn't a compromise, it was a competitive advantage. Here is what is fascinating. Hybrid work didn't just change location, it changed leadership. Old management models relied on visibility. If I see you at your desk, you must be productive. Remote work broke that illusion. Leaders had to shift toward output over hours, trust over supervision, clarity over assumption, communication over proximity. Managers who thrived were those who could set clear expectations and measure outcomes, not attendance. Hybrid exposed weak management practices and it elevated strong ones. But let's be honest, hybrid isn't perfect. Some employees feel disconnected. New hires struggle to build informal networks. Innovation can suffer without spontaneous collisions. Companies like Microsoft and Airbnb now invest heavily in intentional in person gatherings. The office is evolving from a place to work daily to a place to collaborate periodically. That is a profound shift. Bottom line is, hybrid and remote work didn't begin as a strategy, it began as a necessity, but it evolved into a transformation. Microsoft showed flexibility can scale. GitLab proved remote first can thrive. Airbnb turned flexibility into talent advantage. Starbucks highlighted operational complexity. The office isn't dead, but it is no longer the center of gravity. Work has evolved, and the companies that succeed won't be the ones forcing people back to the past. They will be the ones intentionally designing the future. Because in the end, work isn't about buildings, it is about how humans create value together wherever they are. Let's dive into point number 2 of this episode, gig workforce trends. Let me start with a scene. It is 7:30 a.m. Someone opens an app, accepts a ride request, delivers breakfast, designs a logo, translates a document all before lunch. No office badge, no fixed 9 to 5, no traditional employment contract. Welcome to the gig economy, where work is modular, digital, and increasingly mainstream. But this didn't happen overnight. When Uber launched, it didn't just disrupt taxis, it redefined labor access. Anyone with a car and a smartphone could become a driver. Work became task based and app enabled. Income became flexible. Scheduling became personal. For many, it meant autonomy. For others, uncertainty. Uber's model showed something powerful. Technology could unbundle traditional employment and turn work into a marketplace. And that model is spread fast. Then came Airbnb. Airbnb didn't just create new travel experiences, it created micro entrepreneurs. Homeowners became hosts, spare rooms became revenue streams. The gig wasn't just labor, it was asset sharing. This blurred the line between employee, contractor, and entrepreneur. Suddenly, millions of people were participating in the economy outside traditional payroll systems. The gig model wasn't a niche anymore, it was a structural. But gig work isn't only about driving or delivery. Platforms like Fiverr and Upwork transformed white collar freelancing. Graphic designers, software developers, copywriters, HR consultants. Companies began hiring talent project by project instead of role by role. And here is what it changed. Instead of asking who should we hire full time, leaders started asking what capability do we need right now. The workforce became elastic, talent became global, and specialization became accessible on demand. As gig platforms expanded, so did scrutiny. In places like California, legislation challenged whether gig workers should be classified as employees or independent contractors. Companies like Uber and others faced legal battles about benefits, protections, and labor rights. This raises a fundamental question: is the gig workforce empowerment or precarity? The answer depends on design. During COVID 19, gig platforms became lifelines. Delivery services surged. Freelancers replaced frozen hiring plans. Remote contract work increased. Many professionals who lost full time roles turned to freelance consulting. The stigma around non traditional work began to fade. Gig work wasn't just a side hustle anymore, it was a primary income strategy. Organizations increasingly use gig talent because it reduces fixed labor costs. It allows rapid scaling. It brings specialized skills temporarily. It supports a global expansion. Consulting research frequently discussed by McKinsey and companies suggests that organizations are redesigning operating models to include more flexible talent pools. The future workforce isn't binary, full time versus a freelance. It is blended. Core employees plus extended gig ecosystem. But let's shift lenses. Why do people choose gig work? For some, freedom, control, entrepreneurship. But for others, necessity, income gaps, limited alternatives. The appeal is a flexibility. The challenge is stability. No guaranteed healthcare, no paid leave, no long term security. This is where HR and leadership must rethink benefits and engagement for non traditional workers because culture doesn't stop at payroll boundaries. Forward thinking companies are experimenting with portable benefits models, freelance communities, hybrid employment contracts, internal talent marketplaces. Some organizations are even building gig style internal systems, allowing employees to pick short term projects across departments. The gig mindset is influencing traditional employment. Work is becoming more fluid. The big shift. The gig workforce trend reflects a deeper transformation. Employment is no longer the only path to economic participation. Work is becoming platform based, project based, skill based, location independent. The power is shifting from roles to capabilities, from tenure to talent. Bottom line is the gig workforce a temporary disruption or a permanent redesign? If history is a guide, it is not going away. Uber showed work can be platformized. Airbnb showed assets can generate income. Fever and Upwork showed expertise can be globalized. Amazon showed skill can be elastic. The organizations that thrive won't ignore gig trends. They will design for them responsibly because the future of work isn't about choosing between traditional and gig. It is about building systems where flexibility and fairness coexist. And the companies that balances both will define the next era of work. Let's dive into point number three, skills over degrees. Let me start with a story. A young woman applies for a tech job. She doesn't have a computer science degree, no Ivy League credentials, no formal university background, but she has built apps, completed coding boot camps, contributed to open source projects, solved real world problems. A decade ago, her resume might have been filtered out in seconds. Today, in many companies, she gets an interview. That shift from degrees to demonstrable skills is quietly transforming the workforce. Let's talk about one of the biggest signals in this movement. In 2021, IBM announced that nearly half of the US job openings no longer required a 4-year degree. That is massive. IBM didn't do this for PR. They did it because they were facing a talent shortage, especially in cybersecurity, cloud, and AI. There simply weren't enough degree holding candidates to fill the roles. So they asked a different question: what skills do we actually need? They created apprenticeship programs. They partner with community colleges. They emphasize the certifications and technical capabilities. What was the result? Access to broader talent pools, more diverse hiring pipelines, and faster skill alignment to business needs. IBM calls this approach skills first hiring. It is not about lowering standards, it is about redefining them. Now look at Google. Google launched career certificates in IT support, data analytics, UX design, and project management. Programs are designed to prepare people for jobs in months, not years. More importantly, Google publicly stated that these certifications would be treated as equivalent to a 4-year degree for relevant roles. That was a cultural signal. When one of the world's most respected tech companies says, "Show us what you can do," instead of "show us where you studied," the hiring conversation changes and the companies have followed. Companies like Bank of America and Accenture have also expanded apprenticeship programs and reduced strict degree requirements for certain roles. Why? Because the labor market shifted. Technology evolves faster than universities' curriculum. Skills expire quickly, and access to education is uneven. Degrees became proxies for competence, but proxies aren't always accurate. Skills are measurable, degrees are credentials, and companies are learning the difference. Let's zoom out. For decades, a bachelor's degree was considered the golden ticket to stable employment, but student debt in many countries skyrocketed, and millions of capable people were excluded from opportunity because they didn't follow a traditional academic path. At the same time, coding boot camps, online platforms, and micro certifications exploded. Platforms like Coursera, Udemy, and others created alternative learning pathways. The world democratize access to knowledge, companies had to catch up. Here is something powerful. When companies remove unnecessary degree requirements, they often increase diversity. Why? Because degree attainment rates differ across socio-economic backgrounds. By focusing on skills instead of formal credentials, organizations unlock talent that was previously screened out. It's not charity, it is competitive advantage. Skills based hiring widens the funnel, and in talent scarce markets, that matters. Let's be clear, this is not the death of higher education. For fields like medicine, law, engineering, degrees are essential. But for many roles, especially in tech, operations, digital marketing, and analytics, the real predictor of success is capability, not campus name. The shift isn't anti degree, it is a pro skill. This movement isn't just about hiring, it is about internal mobility. Organizations are asking, can someone move into a new role because they developed the skills, even if their background doesn't match it traditionally? Forward thinking companies are building internal talent marketplaces where employees can apply for projects based on capabilities, not job titles. That is cultural transformation because it signals we value what you can contribute, not just what is on your diploma. Imagine being a talented professional who couldn't afford university, or someone who switched careers at 35, or a military veteran transitioning into civilian tech work. A skills first approach says you are not defined by your academic history, you are defined by your ability to learn and perform. That is empowering and it aligns with how fast and the world is changing. Because in the AI era, the half life of skills is shrinking. Continuous learning matters more than one time credentials. So, here is the real question for HR and business leaders. Are we hiring for pedigree or for performance? Are our job descriptions filtering out capable people? Are we using degrees as a shortcut because it is easier? Companies like IBM and Google didn't shift for trendiness, they shifted for survival and competitiveness. Because in a world moving this fast, adaptability beats a tradition. The move toward skills over degrees reflects a deeper truth. The future of work belongs to learners, not just graduates, not just certificate holders, but people who can demonstrate capability, solve problems, and adapt. Degrees open doors, skills build careers, and the organizations that prioritize capability over credentials will have access to widest, most dynamic talent pool in the world. Let's dive into point number 4 of this episode, employee well-being as a strategy. Let me start with a question. What happens when a company treats well-being not as a perk but as a business strategy? Not yoga classes for branding, not free snacks in the break room, but real structural decisions that protect people's energy, mental health and stability. Because here is the truth. Burned out employees don't build innovative companies. Exhausted teams don't create exceptional customer experiences. And anxious cultures don't drive sustainable growth. The smartest organizations have realized that well being isn't nice to have, it's competitive advantage. Let's go back to 2020. When the pandemic hit, employees worldwide were thrown into remote work overnight. The lines between home and office disappeared. At Microsoft, leadership began noticing something troubling. Meetings increased, working hours expanded, digital fatigue. Satya Nadella publicly acknowledged something powerful. We are experiencing a digital exhaustion. Instead of pretending productivity was soaring, Microsoft leaned into well being as a leadership priority. They introduced no meeting days in certain teams, encouraged managers to check in on mental health, invested in flexibility and hybrid models. This wasn't a softness, it was a risk management because burnout leads to attrition. Attrition leads to loss of institutional knowledge, and that affects revenue. When well being became a strategic conversation, engagement stabilized, and Microsoft's performance remained strong through uncertainty. Now look at Starbucks. For years, Starbucks offered healthcare benefits to part-time employees, something uncommon in retail. They introduced mental health benefits and expanded family leave programs. Why would a retail company invest so heavily in benefits? Because the brand promises human connection. You can't create warmth for customers if employees feel undervalued. Starbucks understood something fundamental. Employee experience and customer experience are directly linked. Well being culture reinforced the service reinforced the brand loyalty. That is a strategy. Now let's examine a harder story. During COVID, travel collapsed. At Airbnb, revenue dropped dramatically. Layoffs became unavoidable. But here is where well-being as a strategy showed up. CEO Brand didn't send a cold corporate memo. He wrote a detailed letter explaining why decisions were made. He extended healthcare for departing employees. He created alumni support systems to help them find new roles. Even in downsizing, well being mattered. Why? Because how you treat people during hardship shapes employer brand, future hiring, and internal trust. Airbnb later went public successfully. Trust survived the storm. Research from organizations like Gallup consistently shows that employees who report higher well being are more engaged, more productive, and less likely to leave. Engagement impacts profitability, retention impacts cost, well being impacts both. So, when leaders ask, can we afford to invest in employee wellness? The better question is, can we afford not to? At Google, internal research revealed that psychological safety, feeling safe to speak up without fear, was the strongest predictor of team performance. That is well being, not spa-days, not office perks, emotional safety. When employees feel safe, they contribute ideas. When they contribute ideas, innovation increases. When innovation increases, competitiveness strengthens. Well being fuels performance. Let's be clear. Well-being strategy isn't about bean bags and meditation apps. It is about structural decisions, reasonable workloads, manager capability in empathy, clear priorities, flexible policies, access to mental health support, sustainable performance expectations. Some companies now track burnout risk as seriously as a financial risk because burnout spreads, it reduces quality, increases errors, weakens morale, and in knowledge based industries, human energy is the core asset. As hybrid work becomes normal and AI accelerates productivity expectations, well being will only grow in importance. High output cultures without recovery cycles collapse. Sustainable performance requires rhythm. Companies that understand this will attract better talent, reduce turnover, and build resilient cultures. Those that ignore it may see short term gains but long term fatigue. Employee well-being is no longer a soft HR initiative. It is a strategic lever. Microsoft showed that acknowledging burnout protects performance. Starbucks proved that benefits reinforce brand identity. Airbnb demonstrated that humanity during crisis builds trust. Google revealed that emotional safety drives innovation. The companies that win tomorrow won't just optimize the systems, they will protect energy because in the end your people are not just resources, they are your competitive advantage, and when you treat well being as a strategy, performance follows. Let's dive into point number 5, human centered workplaces. Let me take you back to a moment many of us experienced. You are staring at your screen, back to back meetings, deadlines stacking up, Slack notifications blinking non stop, and you ask yourself quietly, is this work designed for humans or machines? For decades, workplaces were built around efficiency, optimize output, minimize cost, standardize behavior. But the future of work is shifting. The question now is, what happens when we design workplaces around human needs and not just operational metrics? That is what a human centered workplace is, and some companies are already proving it works. When the world shifted to hybrid work, many companies rushed to pull employees back into offices. But at Microsoft, leadership approached it differently. Instead of enforcing a strict return, they emphasized flexibility and trust. They recognized something critical. Productivity doesn't come from presence, it comes from clarity and empowerment. Microsoft built policies allowing hybrid arrangements by default, not exception. Managers were trained to focus on outcomes rather than hours logged. That is human centered thinking. It acknowledges that people have families, different work styles, and different peak productivity hours. And interestingly, Microsoft didn't collapse under flexibility. It thrived because when employees feel trusted, they respond with accountability. Now look at Airbnb. In 2022, Airbnb made a bold announcement. Employees could work from anywhere permanently. No salary reduction based on location. Why to take that risk? Because Airbnb understood its own identity. It is a company built around belonging anywhere. To restrict employees geographically would contradict its core philosophy. By aligning policy with purpose, Airbnb strengthened culture, applications for jobs search, employee satisfaction increased, and performance remained strong. Human centered workplaces align work design with human freedom. Let's shift to a different industry. Retail and hospitality are not typically associated with flexible Retail and hospitality are not typically associated with flexible, human first design, but Starbucks invested heavily in benefits like healthcare for part time workers, tuition assistance, and mental health resources. Why? Because they recognize something simple. Employees are not just baristas, they are students, parents, caregivers, dreamers. When you support the whole person, you unlock stronger engagement, and customers feel it. Human centered design isn't about luxury, it is about dignity. At Google, internal research through Project Aristotle found that the highest performing teams shared one common trait: psychological safety. Not IQ, not tenure, not even technical expertise. Safety. That meant people felt comfortable admitting mistakes, asking questions, and challenging ideas. Google responded by training managers to encourage open dialogue and vulnerability because innovation doesn't happen in fear based environments. It happens where people feel safe to think differently. A human centered workplace recognizes emotional safety as a productivity driver. Let's simplify it. A human centered workplace asks, do employees have autonomy? Do they feel heard? Are workloads sustainable? Are policies built around trust? Does leadership show empathy? It shifts from how much can we extract to how can we enable people to thrive. And here is the paradox: when you enable thriving, performance improves. Think about the best workplace you have experienced. Was it the one with the strictest policies or the one where you felt trusted? Where a manager checked in on you, not just your deadlines? Where flexibility wasn't earned through exhaustion but offered through respect? That is the emotional difference. Human centered workplace recognize that humans are not linear productivity machines. We have rhythms, we have limits, we have aspirations beyond job titles, and when organizations acknowledge that reality, something powerful happens. Loyalty increases, creativity rises, collaboration deepens. As AI automates more tasks, uniquely human skills, creativity, empathy, problem solving will matter even more. And those skills flourish in environments designed for humans, not fear, not micromanagement, not rigid control, but trust, flexibility, and dignity. Companies like Microsoft, Airbnb, Starbucks, and Google are showing that the future isn't just digital, it is human. Bottom line is, a human centered workplace doesn't lower standards, it raises them sustainably. It says we expect excellence and we will create conditions where excellence is possible. Because in the end, buildings don't innovate, policies don't create culture, humans do. And when you design work around people instead of forcing people around work, performance becomes natural, not forced. That is the real future of work. Let me conclude this episode. This episode explores the future of work as a flexible, digital, and human centered. From hybrid evolution at Microsoft to gig trends shaped by Uber and skills first hiring at IBM. The episode highlights well being, adaptability, and human centered design as strategic priorities for HR leaders shaping tomorrow's workplace. Thank you for listening to Beer HR series. Have a nice day.